Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Iain.
And so am I. That's right, I'm back after a short break.
6 weeks. Well, welcome back, Iain, and welcome back to you all. This is Become the Teapot, the podcast where we discuss one comic book adaptation in relation to the comic books that inspired them, in an effort to get my friend Iain to read more comics. When he's here, that is. And he's back not a moment too soon, because as regular listeners will know, we're going to be discussing something that he knows far more about than I do.
That's right, this episode we'll be discussing something Iain hasn't watched before, and I haven't read before. I gave him the task of watching the first 6 episodes of Arrow Season 1, and he gave me the task of reading Green Arrow Year 1 by Andy Diggle and Jock. The show debuted in 2012, and somehow he's managed to go this long without watching a full episode, or any of its many spin-offs. What will his opinions be? Will he be a keen arrow or a mean arrow? Let's find out. So, the first 6 episodes of Arrow Season 1.
Yes.
What did you think of it?
I mean, it's basically Hollyoaks with a bit of parkour, isn't it?
Parkour Oaks.
Yeah. I mean, it's 75% soap opera, 25% superheroes, give or take, maybe a bit less. Everyone is conventionally attractive, and most of them are serviceable actors. With the exception of a couple maybe guest stars that episode who are just hammering it up like crazy, but they're never given much focus, so you don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, I mean, the first half of the season is very episodic.
Yes.
Which, it's a shame that you've only watched 6 episodes, because I think the second half of the first season is much better than the first half.
Okay.
I did hear on the Persepolis episode that you and John were talking about Supernatural and the standard CW fare.
Yes.
Would you say this is in that group?
I would, yes. I mean, the thing with it is it feels a lot older than it actually is. You know, this is made in 2012, but it really reminded me of one of 2 shows, actually, that I used to watch in my early teens. The first being Smallville, which was 2001, and the other is The OC from 2003. It really reminded me. In fact, it's a lot like Smallville, including the same basic format, just down to everything is very similar. It consists of a lot of scenes where there are 2 people in one of half a dozen sets that they've got. You know, they've built these sets, we might as well use them. Those 2 characters clumsily sort of recap the parts of the plot that are going to come up in that episode, and then they fill in the story for what's happening later in this episode. And then for some reason, Ollie will then recap this in a voiceover, just for real thick people who haven't figured out what those 2 people were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, that's something that, going back and rewatching it, I forgot how much voiceover there was.
Yeah.
That does die down, or at least it goes away in the seasons afterwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, good. I mean, it did happen in Smallville as well when I used to watch that. But it's, you know, the same basic formula carried on throughout. But they did ease off on the episodicness of things. But, you know, each episode, they resolve the plot's episode. It usually features some minor DC comic book character who doesn't really resemble their comic book character counterpart. Then they have a B plot, which is building up the sort of series arc. So, you know, telling the story of the main villain who's going to crop up at the end and be defeated, I assume. And then there's 10 minutes at the end of each episode with more people talking in rooms to wrap things up and set up the next episode. It's, as I say, exactly like Smallville used to be.
We said there that there was a couple of shows that you thought it was like. A show that it made me think of was Lost.
Yeah, a little bit. There's the island.
So there's the being trapped on an island, there's the flashbacks, very Lost, but the other way, so Lost in reverse.
Yes, and with none of the budget. And that I think is another reason why everything feels a little bit cheap, and why there's so many just scenes of 2 people in a room talking, because that fills time. There's some bits where they've obviously spent a bit of money, so the bits on the island, and in the pilot episode there was a bit of action, and then you just have this standard thing where they can't really maintain that 45 minutes an episode over 24 episodes a season. So, you know, they have to make that budget stretch. So they have really, really slow pace. And then Ollie goes to either a rooftop, a warehouse, or an alleyway and beats up some people. And it's the same thing every time. He'll flip off the top of a building, shoot his bow a few times, and while all of the bad guys spray and can't hit anything with their guns, and sometimes he'll kill them and sometimes he won't, depending on who's writing the script that week.
They surely all went to the Stormtrooper Academy.
Yeah.
And just can't hit a single target, even if he's not moving.
Yeah, exactly. Including, and speaking of not shooting straight, Deadshot. So he cropped up in what, episode 3 or 4?
3.
3, okay. He looked crap, and he was crap. Ollie at one point was like, he's on the Interpol list. They call him Deadshot because he never misses. But he does nothing but miss all episodes. He shoots every spray and pray is what he should have been called. But he was absolute rubbish. And then he gets shot in the eye, and I'm assuming, again, he'll be back. Because hopefully that big stupid eye thing he had on gets an update. I have seen some photos of that, of him with a slightly smaller, normal-looking eye thing.
Yeah, not a huge red thing.
Saucer just stuck to his face.
I mean, it sounds like you didn't enjoy it that much at all, really.
It wasn't completely awful. It made us both laugh quite a lot, which I'm not sure was the intention. But, it was quite funny. Every time he flipped off a roof or something, we chuckled. And I quite like John Diggle.
Yep.
He seemed like, the most... possibly only likeable and sensible character in the bunch.
He was quite down to earth.
Yes, yeah, I think that helps. And it's sort of when everyone else is really caught up in their own drama and just running around like keeping secrets from each other or being really over the top, having a character who just turns up and sort of tells people that they're being idiots, it's quite nice. And also Colin Salmon's character. I always like Colin Salmon and things. Walter Steele, that's it.
Yeah.
He just seemed like a really sort of sound guy who just got married into a bunch of drama queens. Sorry, drama queens.
Ha. I see what you did there.
There we go.
That's our one joke of the episode.
So yeah, I mean, it was okay.
Do you not think there was some sort of a certain level of intrigue?
I guess. I mean, it felt a little bit forced. I mean, the origin story that we've seen so far on the island and what's going on there, is interesting, but it doesn't feel like anything that couldn't be done in one episode. Like you said about Lost, for instance, the whole point of Lost with the flashbacks is that the flashbacks would tell one portion of a story. They would tell it from beginning to end. And even in the flashback aspect of things, you would have a beginning, middle, and end, and you would have a conclusion.
Yeah.
Whereas this just feels like snippets which they're dragging out over a series because they want to make it last longer. Then there's the soap opera aspect. So a lot of the intrigue bits, the bits with his mum looking evil or plotting or talking to Captain Jack, the bits with that happening, they just feel like soap opera. They feel like Dynasty or something like that. There is obviously an attempt at intrigue and having an ongoing plot, but it's so thin that you can tell that it's spread out over this full 24-episode season that they can only really lightly dust it into each episode. They can't actually say, right, well, here's a big chunk that's going to progress the story because they can't do that too early.
Yeah.
I've no doubt that there will be episodes. One of the episodes actually had a bit more progression of that when Colin Salmon was digging around. I've no doubt there will be other episodes where they go into that a bit more, but in every other episode that it crops up in, it just feels like the writer's putting that in there because they don't want us to forget. Oh, don't forget, there's this intrigue going on in the background. It won't really come up this episode, but don't forget it's there.
Well, the bits that I was thinking of was now he speaks Russian and he's somehow part of the Bratva, which are the Russian mafia.
Yeah, he speaks Russian. He speaks Mandarin, I think, at one point as well. There's a couple of bits like that, and yeah. But it's not that much intrigue. He was missing for, 5 years? He was on an island where we know other people were. So the answer is, at some point, he learnt Russian. That is the end of that intrigue, really. It's like the episode of Lost where we find out how Jack got his tattoo. It was like the most boring and pointless episode. The end result is he got a tattoo. Who cares?
Fair enough.
As in a plot point, it's not that important. I assume the fact that he is a member of the Bratva will come up later and have a larger part in things, but it's not that intriguing at the moment.
Well, I've watched actually all of Arrow and pretty much all of the Arrowverse or the CWverse, whatever they're calling it now. I think the reason for that is something called the sunk cost fallacy, which is the fallacy of obviously sunk cost, which means the more time you spend with something, the harder it is to then stop spending time with that thing.
Yes.
So after I invest, times to watch 1 or 2 seasons of something and there's 8 seasons of it, I'm going to have to finish it.
Yeah.
I would say it does get better. Certain seasons are worse than others, but it does increase in value of greatness, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I watched The Walking Dead, and there were times in that series' run that I felt I was only watching it because I'd been watching it for so long. It has got better lately. Not including these last 6 episodes, which were a bit trash, although the Negan one was good. But yeah, there was times in that series that I was only watching it because I've been watching it for so long and I want to see how this plays out. And I've no doubt that seeing all the crossovers later on with Flash and all of that is quite fun to see on the big screen or the small screen because it's not been that fun on the big screen. So I've no doubt that there is some level of enjoyment to be had with all of that. I've got to say, though, getting into this, and especially going into it this late in the day, you know, with 8 seasons of this alone to watch, it's quite a daunting thing to think, especially if you're watching those first 6 episodes thinking, this is a lot like that Smallville thing that I watched for 11 seasons. Because, again, well, first of all, because I was a young teenager and didn't know any better, but also because of the idea of missing out. So I watched 11 seasons of Smallville because I thought, well, I've watched this much, I might as well finish it off. And it was not a satisfying conclusion. And likewise Lost.
Yeah, true. What did you think of the actual character then, of the portrayal of Arrow? Because you've read more than Arrow than I have.
Yeah. He's okay. I think the character does a good enough job with that early stage angsty version of Arrow they've got in here. I've got to say, most of the stuff I've read of Arrow has been in ensemble pieces. You know, he's been in Justice League, a couple of his own things, the Longbow Hunters and stuff like that. But it tends to be later in his career, and it tends to be his interaction with other characters where he is generally a bit lighter-hearted as a character. He's not the brooding Batman type. And he's often paired with Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, or Black Canary, and he tends to be that sort of, and that sort of Robin Hood eco-warrior figure. Not eco-warrior, but certainly a financial crusader. So yeah, it's a strange one because, as I say, I've not read much from his early days, and this representation of Oliver Queen strikes me as someone much more befitting Batman. And this actually happened with Smallville, is that they wanted to make a Batman origin story, but the costs were too big and they were using Batman other places, so they said no, you can't do that. And it feels like they've done the same for this. It feels like they wanted to use Batman. He's gone away for 5 years, he's come back, he's the centre of all this controversy. Where's he been? And here he is building his little bat cave. He's getting his gadgets together. It feels like that. John Diggle is his Alfred, etc.
Yeah, I think I did read something, or there was a rumour, like you've just said, that they wanted to make a Batman show and then they turned it into Arrow. I don't know how true that is, but there are definitely scenes of this that you can go, well, Arrow's not this broody, or why is he being a Batman type?
Well, I remember that was the case with Smallville, and I think then later seasons or mid-seasons they brought in Green Arrow as a character, and I remember reading at the time that, again, that was going to be Bruce Wayne and the early days of him being Batman, but then they weren't allowed to use him, so again they made it Oliver Queen, because there's a lot of similarities between the characters. Rich people who put on this Playboy facade or were Playboys before, who come back from a time away to become superheroes. You can easily see why they supplant one with the other. Yeah.
I suppose slight spoiler for the future of the show, but there is Suicide Squad characters that come into it.
Right.
And that was around the time that they would write in the script, I think, for the first film. So they were told, right, we're using these characters in the film, you can't use them in your show.
Right, okay.
So the episode aired, but then they never really sort of came back.
So was that like Deadshot, presumably, who's already been in it?
No.
He's already been in it. We've seen him.
Yeah, he does come back, and then, pretty much, he's one of the ones that they said, no, you can't use him because he's going to be in our film. That would be so amazing.
Yeah, it wasn't worth it, was it?
No, they should have just kept him in Arrow. But anyway, talking about characters, did you see a couple of characters in episode 2 that have come back from somewhere else? It's quite a weird way of wording that question.
Oh, God. What was episode 2? To be honest, I watched 4 episodes back to back and they sort of blurred into one. So I remember lots of DC comic characters cropping up.
It's more the actors.
Oh, okay. No, you're going to have to narrow it down for me. Obviously, we've said about Captain Jack, but apart from that...
No, there was China White and Martin Sumner, or Summers. But the people who played them, so Kelly Wu...
Kelly who, yeah.
And Ty Olsson, They starred together in X-Men 2.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Lady Deathstrike and the guard person at the jail that gets injected with iron.
Yeah. I can't remember his name.
But yeah, there you go.
There we go. You didn't think to save that for the Easter egg segment?
It's not really an Easter egg. I don't think it's that interesting.
Okay. I still don't know what the difference between your Easter eggs and your random facts are, but I'm sure I'll figure it out one day.
I don't even know.
So that's my opinion of the TV show. Shall we go on to the comics?
Yeah, let's do it.
So obviously, you've watched the television show before. I haven't, but you've not read the comic book. What were your first impressions of that?
I thought it was actually really good. It was one of the comics that I sat down and I read in an hour. It's only 6 issues, so it's not that long. I've read a few DC comics before, and not just for this podcast. A couple of Justice League ones, Cry for Justice and The Rise and Fall.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of same artwork, same kind of style, I guess.
Yeah, it's very cinematic and it's clearly action-driven as opposed to plot-driven.
Yeah, I also think it's a good introduction to the character as well. You definitely see how his character changes from being this, party boy, this champagne anarchist, or what was the term?
Yeah, that was what he called himself, champagne anarchist.
Yeah, so going from that to obviously what he's like after he takes up the mantle. I thought it was a really good few issues to read if you want to know the background or just dip your toe in to the Green Arrow world. I would say this is the one for you, really.
Yeah. It's clearly written as an origin story that could easily be adapted into a self-contained film. They could have just taken the framework of this and made it into a Green Arrow film. It's got a lot of big splash pages, 1 or 2 pages of action with little to no dialogue. They're nicely done, but they don't exactly lend themselves to complex and well-rounded characters, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only like 4 characters in it, apart from henchmen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get what you mean there. There's a few bits of talking, and then action, and then a few bits of talking, and then action. And it's a little bit like, well, we know the main character because we follow him through the story, but the other characters sort of come and go.
Yeah.
You don't get much involvement.
You don't. And what you do get is fairly two-dimensional. It's real cliche-ridden dialogue as well. It's got just about every action movie trope in the book, literally in this book. But it's quite good fun. It's a modern origin of the Green Arrow. It's believable within the sort of action movie world that they've created. I think it's quite enjoyable. I do remember liking it the first time I read it.
Yeah.
Maybe something about reading it in one go this time around, or perhaps it's just that my tastes have changed, but I found it a bit empty, a little bit forgettable, a bit like the TV show, but it was nothing offensive about it, but it just felt a little bit empty in terms of the plot and characters, things that I've come to expect from slightly deeper comic books, perhaps.
Yeah, I did find it quite funny, actually. There was so many head nods and little winks at the sort of camera almost of all of the references that sort of foreshadowed his character.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the Robin Hood bit at the start, and that sort of weaves its way through the entire story. There's the fact that he says that he feels a bit green after a night of drinking. And then one of the henchmen says something like, "Look, it's an arrow. It's a green arrow." I'm like, yeah, we get it. Stop piling them on.
And then also, he then goes to the extent of when you have the characters at the end saying, "We call you the Green Arrow," just random villagers telling him that. Yeah, really just to hammer that home. It wasn't enough to have him kill a parrot and use its plumage as the feathers. It was like, oh, that's clever. It's a Green Arrow. That's why he becomes okay, every character is commenting on that now. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a subtle hint in any way. It's proper this is what you'll be called now.
Yeah.
Everyone has to appreciate that you are now the Green Arrow. Okay, fair enough. I mean, why couldn't it be called Parrot Tail or something?
Well, yeah, maybe. Yeah, I feel like I'm being quite down on it though. It is genuinely well paced. It has a little bit of setup for Ollie's character before the crash, and then it's pretty much survivor mode Ollie for the rest of the comic book.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel too rushed or too slow. Not a huge amount actually happens over those 6 issues. I do feel like you could have, and probably I've not read the original origin of Green Arrow actually, but I assume it was done in 1 issue, and it was basically he crashed on an island, he fought some pirates, and he got away.
Yeah, probably.
You could have easily done this in a shorter time frame. There's only so many times of him jumping through the air, firing arrows with an explosion behind him that are really required to flesh out his plot.
Yeah, half those explosions, I don't know why there were explosions.
There's a helicopter crash, a boat on fire, he shot a fuel vein or something. Yeah.
Some of them were explained. There's a couple that I'm like, I turn the page and boom, I'm like, oh, something blew up. Okay.
Oh, he had explosive arrows as well at some point.
Fair enough, I accept it. I did quite like his clever use of arrows or special arrows.
Yeah.
It was the burning head arrow, the pool cue arrow, which I thought was kind of cool that he twatted someone in the face.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, the explosive arrow, where he sort of taped something to it.
I like the low budget trick arrows because obviously we're used to Hawkeye in the Avengers films and later Green Arrow when he's back, having all the gadgets and having these really tricked out arrows. But I really like just the fact that he just takes off the spiky bit off the arrow and hits someone with it and it just hurts them a lot. Stuff like that. It's like, that's effective solution.
Yeah, they didn't really spend a lot of time actually explaining how he got so good. I mean, I know he was there, it said like days, weeks, months, but also it said that he was trained.
Yeah.
I can't remember the guy's name now, but he said that some guy trained him when he was a kid. And that was it. It was very quickly glanced through.
Well, I don't know about that because they did, unlike the TV show, they made a point of showing Ollie beforehand as a bit of an adventurer. They showed him going to these distant lands and snowy terrains and things like that and being trained by an ex-SBS soldier in all of these survival techniques. And it was just because he was rich and he could do it. He was more of like a Richard Branson millionaire type who just wants to go out and do all these random things. And I quite liked that. I quite liked they said, well, yes, okay, he crashed on this island. He was a billionaire, but he already had some survival skills, hence why he could manage. And on the other hand, I do quite like what they did with Arrow in the TV show, where he was a complete bumbling idiot who was so pathetic he wouldn't even strangle that bird to live and things like that to eat. I liked that they had that as well. So I can see an argument for both, but I think with the comic book, the story they're telling here is that he survived on his own, whereas the TV show seems to be that he was immediately rescued by someone else who helped train him.
Yeah.
The chap who shot him with an arrow in the second episode or so.
Wu Fei or Leaf, I can't remember his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
That guy.
That guy. So he obviously is going to train him as it goes forward in the series. I can see an argument for both, but it does change the context of Ollie's time on the island. It changes it from being a complete loner and isolationist having to survive on your own and managing to being a complete failure and bumblefuck who he luckily gets saved by the one person who's not going to murder him and trained up.
I'm glad that's not his name, by the way.
That's another good superhero name. He was my least favourite Transformer, that one.
Yeah, so in the comics then, I might have not picked up on it, but are we supposed to believe that he was already kind of trained or he could use an arrow before the island?
Well, he talks about that at the beginning. It was Errol Flynn's bow and arrow stuntman trainer who taught him as a kid and apparently said to him at the time, he's like, you've got real talent at this, one of the best I've ever seen. And then he says, but I squandered that like I squander everything else.
Right,
didn't really go into it. He has a line about that. And obviously then as well, we have all of the bit with him adventuring at the beginning with his SBS mate in the snowy terrains and things like that. So you see he's a bit of a daredevil before things. And obviously he was a massive fanboy of Errol Flynn, hence why he spent $100 million on the bow and arrow or whatever he spent on that. So yeah, there were hints at it, and some of them were more subtle than others. But yeah, I think that was the idea, is that although he was rich and he was a playboy and he was a drunk, he wasn't completely useless. He wasn't pampered.
Okay. I think the way that I read that was the fact that he was sort of taken out for the day and, here, kid, have a bow and arrow, have a little play around with this. And that was kind of it.
Yeah.
I didn't really come away from that thinking potentially he was trained in other things prior to the island.
I think that perhaps because you're looking at it through the lens of the TV show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the comic goes out its way to show you that he's done other adventuring, other survival stuff beforehand, and mentioning that he had used a bow and arrow and was good at a bow and arrow beforehand, even though he hadn't practiced it.
Yeah.
So therefore, when he went back to needing it on the island and practicing with it, he got very good very quickly.
Although I will say this, I've watched all of Arrow, and then going on to reading this, I feel like this comic makes me appreciate the TV more.
Okay.
It's quite nice to get the different view, I guess, of the character. I think going from the TV show to the comic, I think I enjoyed that a lot more than vice versa.
Right.
If I hadn't watched TV show at all and picked up this comic, I would have thought maybe it's a little bit too short, maybe not much happens kind of thing.
Yeah. And there's also, in this show, we have already discussed Batman Year One.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you compare it to that especially, there's a real lack of complexity.
Yeah.
With Batman Year One, you've got that dual narrative of Gordon and Bruce Wayne coming to Gotham for the first time. And because it is literally, it's a year one, we see Batman slowly evolving over that time, which is kind of what we happen in this comic as well. He's on the island, presumably if it's his year one, only for a year, but
well, possibly.
But yeah, when you compare it to Batman Year One, it just feels so much more throwaway.
Well, yeah, it does say he's been there for days, weeks, months. It doesn't say exactly how long he was there for. We don't learn that out. We don't find that out. We don't learn that. Something. Yeah, I think I do get what you mean by comparing the two origin stories, especially with all the references we've talked about in the show. The Arrow comic compared to the Batman one is a guy appears on an island, gets hurt, he gets healed, and he leaves. It's a very simple story.
That's it.
It would have been quite nice to get more character development.
Yes.
Apart from the main character.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is that we know that Ollie goes back to the mainland and becomes the Green Arrow. And we know, therefore, he has to survive the island experience and get good with a bow and arrow. And that is essentially it. That's all we need to know about him. And so everything else that happens doesn't tell you anything about Ollie's origin. Mm-hmm. It's just action movie padding. Whereas everything that happens in Batman Year One, his relationship with Gordon, his relationship with Alfred and these other characters, the mobs declining with the advent of costume supervillains, all of that is shaping what Batman had been and what Batman will be going forward.
Yeah.
The term Year One on DC comic books has become a bit more of a catch-all for origin story now. This is just Year One. Whereas, obviously, Batman, there is a reason that one became the seminal storyline.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything afterward has really been able to reproduce that definitive retelling of the origin in the way that did.
Yeah, I mean, comparing the two then, with Batman Year One, it's him coming back home, putting on this persona and the costume and going out and fighting crime for his first year. With this, it's he's on an island and the last page is him at home in the costume.
Yes.
If you make a few character tweaks and it's not Oliver, it's Bruce, you could almost put that at the start of Batman. This could be his 5 years away.
Yeah.
I know, obviously, change the context of not an island and not a bow and arrow, but you kind of can't compare them in that kind of way.
I can see why the TV show has done it the way they have done, is because the more interesting story is Arrow being back on the mainland, not his time away. So if this story had been about Arrow's first year back in Star City, and then there had been regular flashbacks to his time on the island, I actually think that may have been more interesting and had more heft to it, explaining these relationships between Ollie and his supporting cast. Whereas apart from the villains we meet, China White, for instance, there's not really a supporting cast established.
Yeah.
So, as I say, I don't dislike it as a comic book. I think it's a fun, quick read. I just find it a little bit throwaway.
Yeah, I mean, I only read it this morning, so I've not had time to sit on my thoughts, really, or absorb it. Maybe if you ask me in a week's time, I might go, actually, yeah, it wasn't that great. I did enjoy it, though. It's a fun read. It's an easy read.
Yeah.
It's not complicated. There are bits that are funny. The fact that he saves some guy's life because his arm's on fire and then he punches him in the face. Yeah. I did actually laugh at that.
And I quite liked the John McClane-ness of him slowly robbing people of all their clothes as he went through and building the kit as he went.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was some fun bits in it. And as I say, I didn't have a bad time reading it. As you say, I read it in less than an hour as well. But, yeah, like the TV show, it just felt a little bit forgettable.
I did like, though, that Hackett was shot in a very similar way to Martin in episode 2. He gets shot on the shoulder and he gets pinned back into the tree.
Right.
When I saw that, I instantly thought of the TV show.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just kind of nice how these sort of things appear in comics and TV shows that your brain, or at least my brain.
I think I see where this is going. Shall we get it over with, shall we?
Go on, cue my classic theme tune.
Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you.
So, ironically, Ian, you weren't here for Easter,
I didn't even realise.
but you brought the eggs with you. So, what have you got for us this episode?
So I try to pick out small things that people might not have seen, but right at the start of the pilot, there is literally a big slap in the face Easter egg. Literally, you see Deathstroke's mask, his orange and black mask, just on the side, right in front of you at the start of the episode, which, yeah, it's an Easter egg, but it's a pretty obvious one. It's just right there.
Yeah, well, you also see him about 4 episodes in, don't you? 4 or 5 episodes in. So, yeah, Easter egg, foreshadowing, whatever it is, you're a fan of it.
Well, we all know that I like both. We mentioned John Diggle earlier on.
Yes.
He was named in honour of the series author Andy Diggle. But if you look at Deadshot's tattoos in the mirror, you can see Andy Diggle is on his chest, which is John's brother.
Yeah, I think he mentions him to his sister at some point, doesn't he? He says about his brother Andy. Yeah, so named after the writer of the comic book that we read.
Yes, exactly. And this is because Deadshot tattoos all of the names of the people he's killed. Kind of like a weird blend of Victor Zsasz and the guy from Memento.
Yeah, except it makes it really easy for the police to convict you when they finally catch you.
Yeah.
Full confession all over your body, yeah.
It wasn't me.
At least with a tally mark, you can just say, oh, yeah, so I remember how many peanuts I've eaten, or whatever it's...
And here's one that I think is a little bit of a hidden away Easter egg. So when Oliver's arrested in episode 5, in his mugshot, his prisoner code, if you will, was 731941.
Right.
And Green Arrow's first appearance was in issue 73 in 1941.
Okay, well, that's a pretty good one, yeah.
It was a comic called More Fun Comics.
I love the names of old comics.
That's what it was called. And also in the same episode, when he's talking to Laurel in his bedroom, she says something like, oh, can you remember the last time I was here? And they went, oh yeah, it was a Halloween party and you were wearing those fishnet stockings, which I would say that's a reference to Black Canary's classic costume from the comic.
Yes, definitely. Nothing else to say about that one. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, yes, that's true. And you mentioned a while ago in our Scott Pilgrim episodes about the castle that was used, that was then also used in X-Men. The castle that they used in this for the Queen Mansion is Hartley Castle, which that's also been used in various TV and films. It was used as Luthor's mansion in Smallville.
Right.
And the exterior was used for the X-Mansion in X2, 3, and in Deadpool 1 and 2.
Okay, so it's got some superhero pedigree and another connection to Smallville.
Yeah. And then, not so much an Easter egg, more a fun fact.
Okay.
Stephen Amell did most of his own stunts in the earlier seasons, and the pull-up bar that he used in his hideout is called a salmon ladder.
Right, a Colin Salmon ladder.
Yes. But that was made popular in Ninja Warrior, which Stephen himself actually went on that show years later for charity, which it's very, very impressive, actually. I would recommend watching it.
Okay. Right, so he can do all that stuff in real life. I mean, he's obviously in good shape.
Well, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I might look at it. I might not. I've never watched Ninja Warrior, I'll be honest.
To be fair, it is impressive. He does go pretty far with it.
Yeah, he doesn't win, though.
Well, it's a charity, so I think the one that he did, each thing that he completed was £1,000.
Right.
So it was as far you go, more money you get. But yeah, there you go. That's my first Easter eggs back.
Yeah, well worth the wait. I'm glad you're back with your Easter eggs. It wouldn't be the same show without them. And let's leave it there. So let's go back to the TV show and the comic books and wrap things up. Generally speaking, we mostly talked about my impressions of the TV show. I mean, obviously you've watched it all. What are your thoughts on the TV show?
I think going back to watch these, as you said, it does feel a little bit outdated, even though it's only 10 years ago, I guess. I would definitely say that the first half isn't as good as the second half. It's something that I would advise to stick through.
Right.
Until the overarching plot comes into play, it is very much like, teen drama almost. Oh my God, you're in love with my best friend, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. And yeah, the kid sister having a crush on his best friend, etc., etc. Yeah, it's okay though. It's okay. Not very good, but fairly harmless. Like most soap operas, I assume the enjoyment comes from getting to know the characters and wanting to know what happens to them and what happens next, following them week to week and seeing how they change, all with a sort of extra level of vaguely recognisable DC heroes and villains tacked on as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in many ways, that's what most superhero comic books are. That is the appeal of them.
Yeah.
People keep buying them and keep reading Captain America for 50, 60 years because they want to know what happens next to that character. And there are varying qualities as well. So you could almost say that Arrow, the TV series, is a truer reflection of the comic books than any of the standalone films on superheroes that we've had so far.
Yeah. What I would say, though, is obviously the comic is all based about the island. The first, well, even the first half show, I know that you only watched the first quarter. As you get into the second quarter and the last half, they do a lot more flashbacks to the island. So the last half of it is more focused on his adventures on the island or what happened on the island.
They ramp up the ongoing plot line as it goes, right?
Yeah, I think the way that they roughly put it together, I think it was very much that, okay, well, first half, it's more the intrigue, more the mystery, more let's get to the characters down, let's get to explore this part of it. And after that's covered, you go, right, okay, let's get into the overarching plot and also what happened on the island.
Yeah, and as I say, it was fine. I mean, the budget constraints definitely hurt it, as does the soap opera quality acting. It has its moments, as I say, they've clearly spent a bit of money on, but other bits they just have clearly under-budgeted. And as you say, maybe more of the stuff on the island as the series goes on. And I guarantee the finale has had a bit of money. And usually this is what happens with CW shows, is intro and outro episodes, lots of money thrown at them, lots of stuff going on, and then 20 episodes in the middle of just people in rooms talking. And a couple of backflips.
I think nowadays, especially with all the stuff that's coming out on Disney Plus, they are a lot shorter. So it's not 21, 24 episodes. It's 8 episodes or 6 episodes or
and
12
they
episodes.
give it a movie budget.
Yeah.
They give it 150 million over a 6, or WandaVision was 9 episodes. So 6 or a 9 episode run. And it doesn't ever feel like they're just padding things out until they can get to the bit where they can actually spend some money again.
Yeah.
That said, I watched 4 episodes back to back, and then I watched the other 2 another day. So what was it? Around 3 hours worth back to back.
Yeah,
and
roughly.
There was fairly easy watching. I wasn't bored, which is more than I can say for Zack Snyder's Justice League. I wasn't particularly engaged either, but that's fine. It was harmless fun. I didn't dislike it, but I doubt I'll continue watching it either.
Oh, okay. That was one of my questions, actually, is would you carry on to watch the entirety, so the 8 seasons, which I assume was a no, but would you finish off the season?
I think maybe if I had come into this during the first season and watched the first 6 episodes, and then you said, are you going to watch the rest of the season? Maybe would be the answer. But now that there are 8 seasons of this, 6 seasons of Flash or whatever there is, etc., probably the answer is going to be no.
Fair enough. I mean, as I said, I've watched all of Arrow. Flash is still going, so I'm watching that. I'm up to date on that. You've got so many more. You've got Supergirl that I've seen, Batwoman, which has just started its 2nd season, which I'm not up to date on that, but I am still watching it. Superman and Lois, which that's quite new, and I'm into that. So I think it is the fact that I've invested so much time with these characters, or at least in this world, that yes, I do jump around different shows, but I think I'm going to watch all of them eventually.
Fair enough. Well, that's what I mean. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there are people who have watched EastEnders or Hollyoaks or Coronation Street, any of these soap operas since their inception. They've watched them for years and years and years. It is that same idea, is that you've watched something for so long and you get to know the characters, and so your enjoyment is probably greater than someone coming into it with fresh eyes who doesn't know anything about these characters or only knows about their comic book counterparts and who isn't as invested as you are. And as I say, it's quite daunting to look at that. If I went back and watched the first 6 episodes of EastEnders, I don't think if someone then went, hey, so you're going to watch the rest of that? I would probably say no on that as well.
I think, yeah, because it does feel outdated. And I think that if it was fairly new, as in like 5 seasons, not 10, I think you might have a different view. Possibly. As I say, it feels like Smallville, and I've already watched Smallville, and it was okay. I don't need to watch it again. Let's take it back to the comic and the show then. Would you say that there's a certain way to read or watch these from someone who's not seen all of Arrow?
Not really. I think it's where you're coming at from these two characters. If you're a comic book reader, I'd say go read the comic book. It's fine. It's not going to take up too much of your time and you might enjoy it. If you are already a fan of the TV show, check it out. It's an Ollie you'll probably recognise more or less.
Yep.
If someone asked me whether they should watch Arrow at this point, I would not tell them yes.
That's fair.
I would not recommend Arrow to someone based on my initial impressions of it for the first 6 episodes. If someone said, recommend me a comic book to read, I would also not say, right, yeah, first thing I think of, Green Arrow Year 1. I would be much more inclined to recommend Batman Year 1 or a plethora of other comic books.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one because I wouldn't really recommend either of them, but they're both fine. But I think in a world where there is so much better material out there's so many better superhero films alone and superhero comic books alone, that I think you read and you watch these and think, would I really suggest to people that you choose and watch these over dozens, hundreds of other better alternatives? And the answer would probably be no.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in watching and reading them and you want to stick with them, probably read the comic book, then watch the TV show, because if you start watching the TV show and read the comic book, you'll forget all about the comic book by the time you're done watching 8 seasons of Arrow and etc, etc. How about you? As someone who has watched all of the TV show, what would be your recommendations to watch these things, to read them? I mean, would you recommend them?
Yeah, I mean, same idea as you, really. If someone who's watched Arrow, even the first season only, I would say, you've watched that now, go and read this one. Like I said, it's a very quick one, doesn't take up too much time. They will understand what's going on. If someone reads the comic and then says, shall I watch the TV show? I'd say that's up to you. I wouldn't say, yeah, go out and see it. It's amazing. I think it's the fact that I watched it years ago and I'm now going back to rewatch it. So there's a difference.
Yeah.
But if someone was keen to see the show, I would say watch the first season and then see where it takes you.
The thing is, there is a difference in commitment levels to choosing to watch an hour a week of a TV show. So you say, right, well, I'm going to watch Arrow. It's an hour a week. I will plough through this over the next 6 years. And choosing to throw yourself into something of which there is already hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
And I think that's the different levels of commitment. With Walking Dead, for instance, if I were coming into that fresh now, I wouldn't necessarily go and watch 11 seasons of that. It's too big a commitment in a lot of times. If you don't jump on the bandwagon in those early days, trying to catch up, I think, for a lot of these things is just, if they're not of a particular quality, you just never get around to doing them.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, we did The Walking Dead earlier on this year. I watched the first season, clearly.
Yep.
And then I watched the next 2 episodes of season 2 and haven't gone back yet.
Exactly.
I think it's because there's so much out there that I'm like, well, if I watch season 2, I'm going to watch season 3, then I'm going to watch season 4. It's just going to roll on.
Well, that's it. I've been watching a lot more films lately. I got the Letterboxd app and I decided, right, I'm going to make it my effort to watch all of the Oscar contenders and all of these films I've missed out on lately.
Yeah.
And I just think if I watch one series of Arrow, that is 8 films I could have watched in that time.
Yeah. Or Zack Snyder's Justice League twice.
I wouldn't put myself through that again. I did watch, that was part of my watch list, and yeah, we'll save that for another episode perhaps. So I think that pretty much concludes our thoughts on the comic book and the TV show. Any other business?
Yeah, I mean, first time we've covered a DC show. Hopefully a very simple question for you. Would you say that you have a favourite or top few favourite DC shows?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, it's difficult to say because I've not watched any of the CW ones, really. I watched all of Smallville. Yep. I probably wouldn't still call that my favourite. I watched Doom Patrol Series 1. That was pretty good. I enjoyed that. I haven't got around to watching Series 2 yet. Titans, I watched Season 1 and 2. That wasn't great. I watched Gotham, most of Season 1 and some of Season 2, and then I sort of dropped off on that as well. And as a kid, I used to watch the 60s Batman and the New Adventures of Superman. Or Lois and Clark, I think it's known.
Lois and Clark.
That's the one.
Oh, it's both, actually. So it's Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman.
Well, there you go. Colon. But if you're counting imprints, Watchmen was very good. HBO. Watchmen was probably up there. And Preacher, made into a TV show. That was Vertigo originally. And The Boys is Wildstorm, which is a DC imprint. So I'd say probably Watchmen is my favourite out of those ones, but Preacher and The Boys were good too. Good, clean fun. Well, not clean, but other than that, I'd say...
Definitely not with The Boys.
No. Of the DC Universe stuff, so there's things with superheroes in, I would say Doom Patrol Series 1 that I've watched so far is probably my favourite of those. Okay. What about yourself?
Well, first of all, I'm a little bit annoyed that you already chose The Boys. I always forget how clever you are with comics. I thought you would say something like Watchmen or, something like that. And then I was going to say, well, this will probably change your answer because The Boys was by Wildstorm that was purchased by DC in the late 90s. I had a little fun fact all there, but...
No, I'm sorry.
You ruined it.
Is that why you asked?
No, I was just curious.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say my favourite show. I've watched most of the CW shows. I've been watching Swamp Thing as well. Mm-hmm. I've not finished it. I started it ages ago. It's something that I put on and I play on my phone.
Right.
I've got like 2 episodes left or 3 episodes left.
That's not exactly a ringing endorsement.
No, I'll see it through because it was cancelled after 1 season. But yeah, so used to watch the same sort of things. Not seen Doom Patrol yet. Is on my list. But I would probably say Flash, one of my favourites.
I know he's a favourite character of yours, so yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a TV show that brought me into it because it made me go back to read stuff. So it got me into Flashpoint.
Right, yeah.
The variations on that. I'd probably say Flash is my favourite, closely followed by Legends of Tomorrow.
Right, yeah.
Because it's just a daft show. Right. It's pretty much time-travelling superheroes that have silly adventures. That's pretty much it.
Fair enough. That sounds all right, yeah.
And it's just a fun show. It had, the first season had Rory from Doctor Who in.
Right, yeah.
As Rip Hunter.
Yep.
I actually did buy a comic about him or the Time Bandits or something. It's on my shelf. I've not picked it up yet. But yeah, these shows do entice me to go back to read the source things. But yeah, I'd say Flash probably is my favourite.
Okay, cool. I've not watched any of it, so I cannot speak for its quality. But if it's anything like Arrow, I'm sure it's something.
I think with that one, that's only like 3 seasons, I think it is. And they're much shorter because I think it's got less funding than the rest of them. Or it costs too much per episode because of all the time-travelling stuff.
Yeah, his powers are a bit more impressive, let's say, than Green Arrow's. So, yeah, they imagine the budget got to be higher or they've got to do fewer episodes, I would say. Okay, well, cool. So is that all from us?
Is that all from us?
Is that all from us? It must be. Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Iain, for your Easter eggs, and thank you for coming back and rejoining us. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with more Become the Teapot. If you enjoyed Green Arrow and want to read more from DC's Robin Hood, then I strongly recommend Green Arrow, The Longbow Hunters by Mike Grell. If it's the creative team in particular that you're interested in, then why not read The Losers, which has already been adapted into a film, so we'll no doubt cover it on the show somewhere down the line. Email your questions and comments on this and other episodes to becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred listening platform. Next episode, we have a problem, because Iain has already admitted that the comic that we'll be covering is one of the few that he's actually read before. As such, we'll be welcoming a guest on to discuss it with us. So, next episode, join me, Iain and Luke as we discuss Robert Rodriguez's neo-noir anthology, Sin City. See you then.
And then one last Easter egg I noticed was Anthony and Joe Russo, who directed this movie, also directed Community, as I mentioned earlier. And the SHIELD agent that lets Cap onto the first helicarrier is none other than Abed Nadir. And it's good to see that he's doing something with his Greendale Community College education.
John, we're not even doing that episode anymore. Ian's back now. You can go home. Thanks again for filling in, but we're done.